What's up, Tailgaters? You're in the booth with Tailgate Nate today. Welcome to my channel and welcome to another Week 3 preview and prediction. Got two of them coming out for you here this evening. In the first one, well, let's talk about the site of Big Noon Kickoff. Let's go to Madison, Wisconsin, where the Wisconsin Badgers are upset hungry. They're going to be looking to pull off one of college football's shockers this season against a top 5 team in the country. The Alabama Crimson Tide have a lot of new pieces, have a brand new head coach, but they're still the same Alabama. It's the Crimson Tide and it's the Badgers coming up here from Madison. We'll dive on into this game in just a little bit, but before I tell you about the Tide and the Badgers, you guys know I got to say thank you for all the love and support this channel has seen as of late. It really does mean a lot to me, and please continue to show your support really in any way you can. I want to thank you for taking time out of your day to watch this video, and if you're as big of a college football nerd as I am, you have to hit the subscribe button, you have to ring the bell so you know whenever I upload, because we're posting a lot of content this college football season. You can also like, comment, share, and anything else you do to interact with the channel all helps to support what I do here on YouTube. But hey, if you want to help support me in other ways outside of YouTube, you want to follow along my journey to be a sports media professional, some of the other field work and podcasts and other things that I do, go give me a follow on Twitter. That's at TailgateNate29, capital T, capital N, letters, or not letters, numbers, 29 at the end of it. I'd really appreciate a follow over there. So whatever you guys may be willing and able to do to help support me, I would greatly, greatly appreciate that. But let's get all of that out of the way. Let's go ahead and talk about this one between the Tide and Badgers. Ooh, could we have an upset brewing in Madison? Potentially. This game is definitely one of the upset alert games of the week. Bama's still going to be the heavy favorites, of course, but the Badgers have potential to pull this one off. Hey, how do we do preview predictions here for games on my channel? Well, we're going to sort of go through keys to the game when each team possesses the football. So first, we'll talk about what I think the keys to the game are when the Crimson Tide possess the football. So it'll be the Tide offense versus the Badger defense, and then we'll flip it. It'll be the Badger offense versus the Tide defense, and at the end of the video, I'll give you some additional thoughts, how I think the game is going to play out, and eventually my final score prediction for the Tide and the Badgers. Let's roll on into this one from Madison, Wisconsin. They'll be jumping around here from Big Noon Kickoff. If my slide would change, hey, there it goes. I'll now tell you what I think the keys to the game are when Alabama has the football. Look, they lost a lot of pieces in the transfer portal from last season, especially in that wide receiver room. But up to this point, it still looks like a very dynamic, very dominant Bama offense. Look, they have 266 rush yards per game, 230 passing yards per game. Jalen Milroe has looked every bit as good as advertised. You just take a look at what he did in that pass game against South Florida. 194 yards on 16 of 26, 2 touchdowns there in that game, and really lit up the scoreboard against Western Kentucky. Overall is right around that 400-yard mark on the season, 5 touchdowns, and still no picks for Jalen Milroe. But there was a problem with this offense in that past game. It turned the ball over quite a bit. And if you are the Alabama Crimson Tide, you cannot be giving free possessions to this Wisconsin offense that, again, we'll talk about in just a little bit here. But the turnovers just cannot be a problem. This was a team that got dinged with, I believe, 3 turnovers and almost 13 penalties in that game. Yes, 13 penalties for 120 yards. Again, 3 fumbles lost. This South Florida team was really in that game up until the closing moments where Bama started to pull away and ended up blowing that team out by 26. It was 14-13 entering the fourth quarter. Final score ended up being 42-16. So that's kind of one of those moments where the scoreboard a little bit misleading because Alabama quite simply didn't play the style of football that they want to play. The offensive line has looked to have gotten better from last season, but I still don't think all of their issues are fixed. However, if you are the Alabama Crimson Tide, the first key that I have for you going into this game is you need to start fast. You did not start fast at all against South Florida. In fact, you started out really, really slow. South Florida was able to hang within this game, and especially when you turned the ball over, South Florida was able to sort of use those opportunities to keep themselves within that game and keep the Bama offense off the field. Obviously, when Bama's offense took control, we saw what happened in the late stages of that game. So if you are the Alabama Crimson Tide and you want to avoid any aspect of an upset at all, because, and I'll probably say this a couple more times throughout the video, it's clear as day that Alabama is the more talented team than what Luke Fickell and the Wisconsin Badgers have. If you are at Alabama, you need a script flip from last week. You need to start fast, put this thing away early, because if you're Wisconsin defensively, you're going to have to do your job. You cannot get in a sort of firefight here because, as we'll talk about in just a little bit, the Wisconsin offense has not really exploded quite yet. But speaking of not really exploded quite yet, and this is what makes this Bama offense really, really dangerous, is Jalen Milroe. While, yes, he's had some moments there on the ground where he's been able to run the football, overall for Jalen Milroe, he hasn't really turned things on in the rush game as much as we thought he was going to. I mean, 22 carries for 81 yards. Yes, he does lead the team with 4 rushing touchdowns, but throughout at least these first 2 games, we haven't seen him be as dynamic as consistently as he was last season. I'm not saying that he's not dynamic. He still is a very dynamic runner, but expect Milroe to turn things up in getting outside of the pocket and running. He's one of the best quarterbacks, if not the best quarterback in the nation at being able to do that. And you already have to worry about other guys here in this room, such as Miller and Haynes and Hill. You already have to worry about those guys, mainly Miller and Haynes, who have both already rushed for over 100 yards this season and are averaging over 8.5 yards per carry. And Miller averaging darn near 10 yards per carry, 2 touchdowns for each of them there. This Wisconsin defense has to prepare for Jalen Milroe. He's shown the ability with the arm so far this season. He's going to show the ability with the legs in this game. I have no doubt that's going to take a step in the right direction. But line play is going to be massive. Again, even though this is an Alabama offensive front that is well improved from last season, I still don't think it's where some Alabama fans are going to want it to be, right? Alabama's usually had some really, really good offensive lines under Nick Saban. Last year, they were just not a very good offensive line. Added a lot of talented pieces in the portal, and you can just feel like they're still kind of settling in. Well, this is a Badger defense that maybe isn't as physical as last season, and I'll talk about the physicality aspect a lot more when we flip over to the other side of the football. But Wisconsin has already forced 4 sacks. They forced 2 turnovers, and bottom line, they are getting off of the field, and they are coming up with big plays when it matters most, especially here on the defensive front for Wisconsin. You got to provide pressure to Jalen Milroe, and even in these linebackers and safeties, you have to be able to contain Jalen Milroe and not let him be explosive. It's going to be a really tough task to cover these Bama wide receivers, such as Williams, who has really, really exploded here for this team. Ryan Williams, just a freshman, 6 catches for 207 yards and 3 touchdowns. You got to be able to cover him, as well as the running backs that I mentioned here earlier. It's a tough task for this Wisconsin defense, but especially if they can ramp up the physicality and win the battle at the line of scrimmage, they're going to have a shot to pull this thing off. Okay, let's now talk about what happens when Wisconsin has the football, and we're going to start with this Wisconsin offense because it just hasn't really been what Luke Fickell and a lot of the Badger faithful in Madison really want quite yet, right? The downfield passing attack really has not been getting going at all. And you just take a look at the other two, or I just shouldn't say the other two, but you take a look at the 2 games that Wisconsin has played so far this year. It took a lot to get past a Western Michigan team that we just saw get blown out by Ohio State this past week. And then while South Dakota is one of the best FCS teams that we have in the Division I level at the FCS level, right? That was really redundant on my part, but you guys understand what I'm trying to say. South Dakota, one of the better FCS teams. It took Wisconsin a lot to even get through there. They only scored 28 points. They scored 27 points, averaging 27.5 points per game, when really you feel like they should be averaging at least 35, if not more. Tyler Van Dyke was coming in here because, hey, fitting into a new offensive system, you figured it was going to be his time to shine. Not necessarily. I mean, look, he's been, for the most part, pretty good, but he's only thrown 1 touchdown. That's it. He's only thrown 1 touchdown, 406 yards, and we know this rushing attack can really get it going. Ches Malusi, Yakimelli, Tawee Walker is there as well, even though Walker has not ripped off a run longer than 8 yards yet this season. Does have a touchdown, is still a threat in that running back room that the Bama defense is going to have to be aware of. But the first big key for this Wisconsin offense is, look, the run game is going to have their moments. This is Wisconsin, right? The run game is going to have their chances. The offensive line will be able to make a push here and there. But overall, if Wisconsin's going to want to pull this upset off, that deep ball has to be found from Tyler Van Dyke. You have to be able to find your wide receivers like Pauling, like Green, and some of the other that, in my opinion, underrated weapons that are in this room, you got to be able to get them going downfield. The short pass game, okay, sure, fine, that's going to work in moments. But when Bama starts to read that and they start to provide more and more and more pressure, make Tyler Van Dyke have to make quicker and quicker decisions, those short routes are going to become harder, harder, and harder. You have to be able to find something down the field, which is going to be well easier said than done because this is a Bama defense that has been spectacular in the secondary this season. They have a ton of really, really good players that are back there in that secondary who have just played phenomenally this season after maybe the past defense not as good as it has been for Bama in the past seasons under Nick Saban last year. This year under Kalen DeBoer, I mean, it looks a whole lot better. The secondary is aggressive. It's going after these wide receivers, taking those deep shots down the field. And even though it again hasn't necessarily been tested that well quite yet, they limited a guy who was a pretty good quarterback last week in uh, Byron, uh, Byron Brown. Sorry, I was blanking on the name there for a second. They were able to limit him and a USF offense that has a ton of potential to not really be as big of a factor as USF was going to need it to be there to win that game. What I'm trying to say, guys, this is a really, really impressive Bama secondary, and Van Dyke has got to be able to find that deep ball. It's going to be a tough task to do so. And even Bama's rush defense, while it definitely is sort of that weak point, again, I'm using quotes there, weak point of this defense, the defensive front is still fantastic. It's forced 5 sacks. The defense as a whole is only allowing opponents to convert on around 14% of third down tries. They are only allowing 3 yards per game. This has just been a really good Bama defense this year, and Wisconsin's little ploy here to try to control the clock, I don't think is going to be enough. Like I said, you have to get Tyler Van Dyke to create these explosive plays. Your run game is going to have to rip off some really, really big moments here if Wisconsin's going to want to be able to win this game. And like I mentioned when we talked about the other side of the ball, it's definitely going to come more into play here on this side. Physicality has been an issue for Bucky this year. We know Wisconsin usually is a very physical, hard-nosed team. Defensively, they still are finding a little bit of that, but especially offensively, they're not as physical as you'd like them to be. And yes, that same argument can be applied to the defense as well. The defense definitely is still not as physical as some of the other Wisconsin defenses that we have seen throughout seasons prior. They have allowed 3 sacks already. They've turned the ball over twice while the third down conversion percentage is good. Again, the explosiveness is just not there, which it needs to be if you want to beat a team like the Alabama Crimson Tide. Again, like I mentioned, this is the big noon kickoff game on Fox. Bama is the clear heavy favorite here in this matchup, and I clearly am going to go with Bama here into this game. I just don't think Wisconsin has the explosiveness to be able to match this Kalen DeBoer explosive offensive system. Like I talked about earlier in my keys, Jalen Milroe hasn't really turned on the explosive run game that he saw last year, at least as consistently. He's really going to show out with both the arm and the legs in this game. And I do think that Alabama, pun absolutely intended here, is going to spoil the jump around party and, here's the pun, roll in Madison. I got 34-14 here. I think this Wisconsin offense is really going to struggle. The Bama defense looks really, really good. Kalen DeBoer has employed a great philosophy. He's done really, really good things with this program already, picking up right where Nick Saban left off. Bama looks like they could be one of the elite teams in college football and going on the road here and beating Wisconsin to what I predict by 20 points. Especially then when next week you have a bye week, the very week after you have the game against Georgia. Bama's going to want to look to make a statement here. I think they do. 20-point road win for Kalen DeBoer's Crimson Tide. Let me know what you guys think about this game in the comment section below. Remember to play hard but tailgate harder, and I'll see all you guys in my next video. Hey, we'll talk about another Top 25 showdown. Goodbye.